Welcome to the Power Book of Podcasts. Unlock your potential with powerful book summaries that inspire personal growth and broaden your understanding of the world. Each week, we explore life-changing ideas, from leadership to mindset strategies to keys for happiness and success. Learn actionable insights to apply in your daily life. Join our growing community of thinkers and seekers. Like, comment, and hit that subscribe button now. It's time to supercharge your mind with the Power Book of Podcasts.
Okay, so ready to step into a law school classroom.
Sounds fun.
Because in this deep dive, we're going to crack open learning to think like a lawyer.
Ooh, exciting.
And this book, this isn't like your typical boring textbook, you know.
Right.
It's based on real research, actually observing how law students, learn their craft.
Yeah.
And let me tell you,
Yeah.
it reveals some pretty surprising things about like this hidden language code that transforms how they read and think, even talk.
Wow.
It's wild.
So what's fascinating is that it goes like way beyond just legal jargon. We're talking about how even seemingly neutral language, the kind they use in law schools, can actually carry like all this unseen baggage.
Oh, interesting.
Cultural assumptions, power dynamics, you name it.
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy.
The book actually calls it a filtering structure. And it really is like learning to see the world through like a whole new set of eyes, a whole new lens, basically.
Right.
But honestly, what I found the most interesting is how this all starts right from the very beginning.
Okay.
Like with how they're taught to even read legal cases.
That's interesting. It's like, becoming fluent in another language.
Yeah.
But the consequences are way more profound than just communication.
Right.
This linguistic shift, it can actually have a real impact on things like fairness and access to justice, even if that's totally unintentional.
Okay, so let's break this down a little because
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of people listening are probably like, how can language do all that?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Like one of the first things the book points out is how law school subtly pushes students away from seeing individual stories.
Right.
And more towards like these abstract legal categories.
Exactly. Think about like a contracts class, for example.
Okay.
A student, they might initially see a dispute as just, say, a homeowner fighting with a roofing company.
Okay.
But then the classroom discussions, they start to shift their focus to the legal labels instead.
Yes.
Like offer and offeree or breaching party.
Interesting.
It's like a fundamental change in how they see things.
So instead of like empathizing with the homeowner's leaky roof,
Yeah.
the student is being trained to analyze it in this like detached, like clinical way, right?
Yes.
Using these abstract terms.
Precisely. And that detachment, that's absolutely key to thinking like a lawyer. It's all about setting aside your personal opinions or moral judgments
Right.
and learning to just apply legal principles objectively.
Okay.
But here's the catch. The book argues that this detachment, while crucial for legal reasoning, can also obscure like the social context and individual experiences that are often like at the heart of these cases.
That makes sense. You're right. And the book actually gives like some really powerful examples of this in action.
Yeah.
It talks about how legal language often uses this reasonable person standard, which on the surface sounds neutral enough, but is it really?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
The book, it really dives deep into this, arguing that this whole reasonable person standard is actually loaded with the biases of, those who created the law in the first place.
Wow.
So, like, whose idea of reasonableness are we really talking about?
Yeah, exactly.
And whose experiences are considered, like, normal?
Right. So this seemingly objective standard
Right.
might actually be favoring those who like already hold power,
Exactly.
simply because their worldview is like baked into the language of the law.
Exactly. And this leads to a much bigger question, right?
Yeah.
Can legal language, despite its potential for bias, actually also be a tool to challenge those inequalities? Can lawyers use their skills to bring those like hidden social contexts to light?
Right.
And actually make the system more just?
Yeah.
It's a real tension the book grapples with.
Now, everybody has heard of the Socratic method, often portrayed as like this brutal intellectual sparring match, right?
Right, yeah.
Is it really as intense and intimidating as the rumors suggest?
Well, the book, it actually gives us a more, I guess, nuanced perspective.
Okay.
It suggests that while like rigorous questioning is definitely a core part of, law school, the pure take no prisoners Socratic method might actually be less prevalent than we think.
Really? So I always pictured law school as like professors grilling students relentlessly until they like break down and admit they know nothing.
It's not quite that dramatic.
Clever.
The book, it found that most professors actually use a more modified Socratic style. So it's less about humiliation and more about guiding students through like a structured thought process. Using questions to, help them arrive at the legal reasoning behind a case.
So it's not just like a free-for-all of intellectual torture.
Right.
Okay. I have to admit, I was getting a bit nervous there.
The professors in the book, they still used like pointed questions, to make them think. But they also, provided explanations. They summarized key points. They even like used humor sometimes, to make it like a more engaging learning experience. It's a delicate balance.
That makes sense. But even like this modified Socratic method still sounds pretty challenging.
Yeah, it can be.
Can you give us an example of like what this linguistic dance between professor and student actually looks like?
Absolutely. The book, it describes this scenario where a professor asks a student to like break down a case involving a broken contract. Instead of like simply retelling the story, the student is pushed to identify, the specific legal elements of a breach. Like offer, acceptance, and consideration. They have to use like that legal vocabulary to build their argument.
So it's like they're like dissecting the situation and rebuilding it using the language of the law.
Precisely. Through this whole process, the student, they learn to see the case not just as like a personal dispute anymore, but as like a legal puzzle that needs to be solved by applying, specific legal principles.
And the book emphasizes that this questioning isn't just random. Like there's a method to the professor's madness,
Yes. And it's not just about getting the student to like the right answer either. It's about teaching them to think strategically, to like anticipate counter arguments, and to develop like the linguistic agility to argue both sides of a case.
That makes sense.
Being able to see all sides, that's like crucial for any lawyer.
Absolutely. And the book, it highlights how this linguistic training, it can be incredibly empowering actually. Giving students the tools to navigate the complexities of the legal system. And to advocate effectively for their clients. But like we've been talking about this, like hyper-focus on legal reasoning.
While important, can also have some, unintended consequences. It's like seeing the world through a very specific lens. And maybe a limited one.
And the book acknowledges this. It really emphasizes that while, a legal education is incredibly valuable, it's important to be aware of this potential disconnect between, legal reasoning and the social realities that these cases are embedded in.
And this brings us to some, thorny ethical territory.
Yeah, for sure.
If you're trained to like detach legal reasoning from personal morality, how do you deal with cases that clash with like your own sense of right and wrong?
That's the big question. And it's something the book really tackles head on. It explores the idea that while a detached, objective approach is essential for like legal analysis, lawyers also need to be like acutely aware of the potential social and ethical implications of their actions. It's like a constant balancing act. The book, it illustrates this with a really powerful example too.
Oh, tell me about it.
It describes like a student who became visibly upset while discussing the concept of efficient breach in a contracts class.
The student felt like it was morally wrong to break a contract simply because it was like financially beneficial, They just couldn't reconcile that with their own sense of ethics.
And the professor's response was really interesting.
What'd he say?
He like acknowledged the student's feelings, but he also emphasized that his job was to train them to be like black belts of contract argumentation.
Wow.
Regardless of their personal opinions.
Which really highlights that tension at the heart of, legal education. You need to develop both like the technical skills and the ethical awareness to navigate the complexities of the legal profession.
It's almost like lawyers are trained to be like linguistic chameleons,
Kind of,
able to argue any side of a case while remaining aware of like the bigger picture.
And that's no easy feat.
No.
It requires like a unique blend of intellectual rigor, linguistic dexterity, and like a deep understanding of how the law actually intersects with society and, our own personal ethics.
Speaking of which, the book also delves into how gender and racial dynamics play out in law school classrooms.
That's interesting.
What did it find?
Well, the research, it kind of highlighted how patterns of participation in class discussions often reflect broader societal inequalities.
Okay.
For example, it found that men, especially white men, tended to dominate conversations, particularly in classes that used a more traditional, confrontational style of the Socratic method.
And this wasn't just about personality or confidence levels, right?
No, it seems like there are deeper forces at play.
Exactly. The book suggests that these subtle cues from professors, coupled with the inherently competitive nature of law school, can create an environment where certain students, feel less comfortable speaking up.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Or sharing their perspectives.
Yeah. It's not just about who's the loudest voice in the room.
Right.
It's about whose voices are actually encouraged and valued.
Yeah.
And whose might be unintentionally silenced.
Exactly. And those dynamics can have long-lasting consequences.
Right.
They can impact who feels empowered to actually participate in the legal profession.
For sure.
And ultimately whose perspectives shape the law itself.
Yeah, that's a powerful point. Something that really struck me in the book was how this whole filtering structure of legal language doesn't just change how students think.
Yeah.
It actually shapes their sense of self.
Oh, interesting.
They start to develop what the book calls legal personae.
It's they're not just learning a new way of thinking, they're actually becoming different people almost.
Exactly. It's not just about adopting a more formal way of speaking or dressing professionally.
Right.
The book, it argues that this transformation goes much deeper, impacting how students see themselves, in relation to the law and to society as a whole.
Yeah.
It's stepping into a specific role, kind of. One that comes with its own set of expectations and ways of interacting with the world.
It sounds like they're learning to inhabit a position of authority almost.
That's a good way to put it.
To think and speak from a place of legal expertise.
That's right. And the book uses some interesting linguistic tools to break down how this actually happens.
Okay.
For example, it looks at the use of reported speech in, law school classrooms.
Oh, right. It talks about how professors will often put words in the mouths of the people involved in the cases, right?
Yes.
Even fictionalizing their thoughts or dialogue sometimes to make a point.
Exactly.
And first I was kind of that's weird.
Yeah?
But the book actually made me see it in a whole new light.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
The book suggests that this practice, while subtle, actually teaches students to reimagine the world through that legal lens,
Right.
They learn to anticipate how someone might argue from a particular legal position.
Yeah.
Even if that's not how the person actually thought or felt, in the real life situation.
Hold on. If professors are fictionalizing what people in cases are thinking, doesn't that create a kind of warped view of the world?
That's an interesting question.
It's we're imposing legal thinking onto situations where it might not even apply in real life.
That's a great point, and it really gets to the heart of some of the ethical dilemmas the book explores. By constantly engaging in this kind of role-playing and strategic thinking, students start to internalize, the values and assumptions of the legal system, even if those clash with their own personal beliefs.
It can make it hard to stay connected to your own moral compass.
The book really dives into those ethical challenges.
Yeah.
Exploring what happens when, legal reasoning becomes disconnected from personal morality.
Right.
It raises the question, can you be a good lawyer without also being a good person?
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
And I don't think the book tries to give us a simple solution.
No.
It seems like it's an ongoing struggle, for lawyers to balance their professional obligations with their personal values.
It is. And it highlights how law school, while providing this powerful toolkit for legal reasoning, doesn't always prepare students for, the emotional and ethical complexities of actually practicing law.
That's true.
It's one thing to analyze a case on paper,
Right.
It's another to actually deal with the real life consequences for the people involved.
So is the book suggesting that law schools aren't doing enough?
Maybe.
To, like, address this ethical side of things?
It's a valid concern. The book points out that students often have to navigate this ethical dimension, through trial and error.
Yeah.
Or by observing practicing lawyers.
Right.
Which isn't always ideal.
No.
It raises some important questions about how we can, better prepare future lawyers for the real-world challenges they'll face.
Yeah.
Both intellectually and ethically.
It's a good reminder that being a lawyer isn't just about, mastering legal principles.
Yeah.
It's about dealing with, complex human situations.
Right.
And making difficult choices that can have, a real impact on people's lives.
And doing so in a way that, upholds those core ideals of justice and fairness.
Let's get back to how the book unpacks this idea of legal language.
Okay.
It talks about how law schools train students to, see layers of authority when they read legal cases.
Right.
Is it really that different from just reading, a regular text?
It goes much deeper than just, understanding legal precedent. It's about recognizing that, certain types of legal language hold more weight than others. The book reveals how this process of deciphering not only legal terms, but also the hierarchies within those terms really shapes how students perceive truth and authority.
So it's not just about what the law says.
No.
It's about who said it.
Exactly.
And where it fits into this whole system of legal precedents and interpretations.
For example, law students learn to prioritize the written opinions of judges over, say, the personal testimonies of witnesses.
Oh, interesting.
It's a shift in perspective where certain voices are automatically given, more authority based on their position in the legal system.
It's like they're learning a new system for ranking evidence almost.
Kind of, yeah.
A way to determine what's considered, truth within the context of the law.
That's a good way to put it.
And that can't be easy, right?
No.
Because in real life, things aren't always so black and white.
Right. And this linguistic training, it has huge consequences for how legal cases are actually decided.
Oh, really?
The book shows how this focus on legal authority can sometimes lead students to prioritize procedural technicalities over, say, the broader social context of a case.
Can you give me an example of what you mean?
Absolutely. The book describes a scenario where a student might initially feel empathy for a plaintiff who's been injured.
Okay.
But then that empathy gets overshadowed by their focus on whether the plaintiff's lawyer filed the right paperwork on time.
Wow.
It's a classic example of how this filtering structure can shift your attention.
So even if the plaintiff has a strong moral case, they could still lose simply because of a technicality.
Exactly.
That doesn't seem very fair.
That's the tension the book highlights.
Yeah.
While this emphasis on procedure is crucial for maintaining order and fairness in the system, it can also have the unintended consequence of obscuring, the human impact of those legal decisions.
Right.
It's a reminder that the law, even with its aspiration to be objective, is ultimately interpreted and applied by, people who are influenced by their own experiences and biases.
And the book is really pushing us to consider how those biases might be baked into the language of the law itself.
Exactly. It's a call to be more aware of how the language we use shapes our understanding of the law.
Yeah.
And more importantly, how that language might be perpetuating inequalities or, obscuring injustices.
Okay, so we talk about how legal training shapes how students think.
Right.
How they see themselves, their understanding of truth and authority. But what about the role of emotion in all of this?
That's a great question.
It seems like law school is all about logic and reason, pushing feelings aside.
That's the common perception.
Yeah.
But the book actually suggests that law school, while emphasizing, logic and reason,
doesn't entirely eliminate emotion from the equation.
Really? I find that surprising.
It might seem counterintuitive.
Yeah.
But think about it. Professors often use humor, storytelling, even role-playing to engage students on an emotional level and make those complex legal concepts more memorable.
You're right. I remember some of my law professors were really good storytellers.
Yeah.
They could take a dry legal case and turn it into something captivating.
Exactly.
That really stuck with you.
And that's the point. The book argues that these emotional appeals, while sometimes dismissed as just entertainment,
right,
can actually play a crucial role in the learning process.
Okay.
They help students, connect with the material in a deeper way.
Yeah.
Making it more meaningful and easier to remember.
So it's not just about like cold, hard facts and legal principles.
No.
There's a human element to law school.
Definitely.
That makes it both, like engaging.
And I imagine pretty intense at times.
Absolutely. And the book's research, it reminds us that lawyers, despite their professional detachment, are still, human beings who experience emotions.
Of course.
And those emotions, they can shape how they approach cases, how they interact with clients, and ultimately the kind of lawyers they become.
It seems like a book is pushing us to be more aware of like the role of emotion in the legal profession.
It is.
To acknowledge both, its benefits and its potential pitfalls.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between objectivity and empathy.
Yeah.
Between reason and compassion.
We've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
We've explored how legal training transforms how students think, their sense of self, their ideas of truth, and even their relationship with emotions.
Right.
But the book also takes a hard look at like the social dynamics within those law school classrooms, right?
Yes. It examines how like power dynamics, particularly those related to gender and race, play out in these seemingly neutral academic settings.
And what did it find? Are law schools as diverse and inclusive as they claim to be?
Well, the book's research, it kind of paints a complex picture.
Okay.
It found that while law schools have made some progress in increasing diversity, especially in terms of gender, there are still significant disparities in, who participates and whose voices are actually heard.
So it's not as simple as just getting like more diverse students into law schools.
Right.
There's something about the culture of legal education itself.
Yes.
That needs to be examined.
Precisely. And the book digs into this idea of linguistic capital, which is like crucial to understanding these power dynamics. Basically, it refers to the, often unspoken advantages that certain students already have, simply because they're like familiar with the dominant language and culture of the legal world.
So like someone who grew up around lawyers, or went to a school that like emphasized formal debates.
Exactly.
Might already have a head start, even if they don't realize it.
Exactly. And it creates this like uneven playing field.
Right.
Some students, they feel comfortable speaking up and participating because the language and style of discussion just feel, familiar to them.
Right.
Meanwhile, others might hold back, feeling like their contributions aren't valued or that they're somehow like behind, even if they're just as intelligent.
I get what you're saying about focusing on procedure, but isn't that also like how loopholes get exploited? Like, couldn't the rich and powerful, for example, just hire lawyers to like game the system?
Oh, absolutely.
Even if they're morally in the wrong?
Yeah.
Just because they know how to work the technicalities.
That's a really important point.
Yeah.
It brings up this bigger issue of how this whole filtering structure we've been discussing.
Right.
While designed to create a fair and objective legal system, can sometimes actually be used to, like, perpetuate existing power imbalances.
The book gives some pretty stark examples of this playing out in classrooms, right?
Yes, it does.
Like, didn't it talk about how women and students of color were more likely to be interrupted?
Yeah.
Or have their ideas dismissed?
Yes.
Even if those ideas were, like, perfectly valid.
Exactly. And those seemingly like small interactions, they can have a huge cumulative effect on students' confidence and their sense of belonging.
Right.
Imagine constantly being talked over or having your ideas, attributed to someone else.
Right.
It can be incredibly disheartening, especially in, a high pressure environment like law school.
Absolutely. It sends the message that, your voice isn't valued.
Right.
That your perspective isn't important.
Exactly.
And honestly, I bet that experience is something that a lot of people can relate to.
I agree.
Even outside of law school.
It's a much broader, like, societal issue, really. But within the context of legal education, it has these, like, troubling implications. Because over time, if you don't feel heard, you might just stop trying.
Right.
And that leads to, self-censorship, which is a huge loss, not just for the students themselves, but for, like, the legal profession as a whole.
Exactly. We need a legal system that like reflects the diversity of the society it serves.
Absolutely.
And that starts with law schools making sure that all students feel empowered to contribute and share their unique perspectives.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
The book argues that a lack of diversity in classrooms ultimately translates to a lack of diversity in like the legal profession itself.
Yeah.
Which then just reinforces existing inequalities and erodes, public trust in the legal system.
It's like a vicious cycle.
That becomes this self-perpetuating cycle, yeah.
So how do we break that cycle? The book does offer some like hopeful suggestions, right?
It does.
Like, didn't it mention that professors can make a big difference?
Yeah.
Just through like their teaching styles and how they manage like classroom dynamics.
One of the most significant factors is actually faculty diversity. Classes taught by women and professors of color tended to have like more balanced participation and a greater sense of inclusivity.
That makes sense.
It's not just about representation, though, although that is important.
Yeah.
It's also about bringing in different perspectives and approaches to teaching that can like benefit all students.
Having role models who like reflect the student body can be incredibly powerful, right?
Absolutely.
It shows students from all backgrounds
that
they can succeed in this field.
Absolutely. And beyond just, representation, these professors, they often bring like different experiences and teaching styles to the table.
Right.
For example, the book mentions a professor who used like humor and personal anecdotes to make legal concepts more like relatable and less intimidating.
Right.
And that, in turn, encouraged students to, open up and share their own experiences, creating a more like engaging and dynamic learning environment for everyone.
That's such a great example.
Yeah.
It highlights how like simple shifts in approach can make a big difference.
Absolutely.
So it's not just about like changing the curriculum or admitting a more diverse student body.
Right.
It's about fostering a culture of inclusivity.
Yes.
Where everyone feels, respected and valued for their unique contributions.
Exactly. It requires effort from both, faculty and students to be aware of those like subtle biases that can perpetuate inequality. We need to create a space where everyone feels safe to like speak their mind. To challenge each other's ideas respectfully. And to learn from those different viewpoints.
It's like we need to be more aware of that hidden language code we talked about.
Right.
Not just in like legal texts. But in our like everyday interactions.
Absolutely.
Who's speaking. Who's listening.
Exactly.
Whose voices are being amplified.
Right.
And whose are being overlooked.
Precisely. It's about paying attention to like whose stories are being told and whose perspectives are shaping the law itself.
Right.
Because ultimately, a more just and equitable legal system requires us to hear from all members of society, not just, a select few.
Wow. This deep dive has been truly eye-opening.
It has.
We've gone from like decoding the hidden language of law school to like grappling with the ethical and social implications of legal education.
It's a lot to think about.
It is. And what's so powerful about this book is that it doesn't just like present the problems,
Right.
It gives us like a path forward.
Exactly.
By understanding how legal language shapes our thinking.
Yes.
We can start to like use it more consciously and intentionally to create a more just and equitable legal system.
You're right. It's a call to action for everyone, not just, lawyers and legal scholars.
Because ultimately the law, it impacts all of our lives.
Exactly. And it's up to all of us to ensure that it's, a force for good.
So as you continue to like think about all these complex issues, here's a final provocative thought from the book that really stuck with me.
Okay.
If legal language can be used to like obscure social context and individual experiences, how can we also use it to illuminate them? How can we use like the power of language to make the law work for everyone, not just a privileged few?
That's the question.
That's something for you to mull over.